Thanks for joining me. So I want to make this little offering as an amplification in response to our current educational conference number 3, where among other things we addressed systems, sometimes known as field theory, but systems. And I want to do this because at the end of our Courageously Curious Leader Dan's presentation, he, almost as an afterthought, introduced the version known as chaos systems. And interestingly enough, there was quite a bit of liveliness in the room when that system was presented, as opposed to a less lively reaction to the other systems. And so I would like to pick up and amplify on that because, as I myself said, I thought the fact that it was not part of the curriculum was criminal. My words exactly, I believe. Several other people said things like, I'm on the edge of my seat now. Why didn't we start here? Clearly the chaos version was very alive because it literally does represent more the way nature is, and it is more relevant to the way our actual lives intersect these days with reality. So along these lines, things we want to look at is complementarity. I hope you can read this stuff. Complementarity is the effect of different fields being external manifestations, expressions of the same phenomena. The most classic example of this being, of course, light, which can be expressed as a wave or as particles. This is a complementary expression of a field, in this case, the field of light. Complementary relationship between the wave function and the particle function. First step of the iteration. This is going to be a recursive amplification. So we have light expressed as a set of complementary expressions, phenomena of the same, expressions of the same phenomena in two different states. The expressions of states can be contradictory, they can be dissimilar, they can be similar. So the other thing in this field, of course, is magnetism, which we're all familiar with. So a physical manifestation of a field, this field state of magnetism. And we have to give credit to our friend James Clerk Maxwell, who was the first one who pointed out and said that light and magnetism are expressions of the same phenomena, that being the fields of electromotive force, sometimes known as electromotive radiation. We'll call it EMF, electromotive force. Light and magnetism are expressions of the same phenomena. Now, taking this into the example in classroom when our good friend Alden asked about some clarification on the subtlety between the emotional state and the psychological state, where it relates to the level of connection between significant others, whether it's a parent and a child or person to person. Similar, so we have psyche. Here's my lovely little butterfly to represent psyche. So we have the field of psyche. Then we have, commensurately, the field of emotions. We'll call that EMO. Emo for emotions. Psyche and emotions are expressions of the same phenomena. In this case, this field, phenomenological field, I'm going to call libido. Because libido is the energetic force that is supporting the field of emotions and the field of psyche, two expressions of the same phenomena. Now, we can see that already the pattern occurring is recursive. We start with the first stage, light and particles, then this manifestation and the magnetic manifestation, both being expressions of the electromotive force field, which sustains and has these happen in physical reality, or in terms of psyche and emotions, two subsets of the field of libido, the energetic force that sustains the presentation of these fields. And of course, if you didn't see it coming, of course, EMF and libido could simply be seen as being contained within yet another layer of a set. And let's say, just for lack of a better word at the moment, we're going to call this C for consciousness. And I'm sure there's probably some intermediary step. But as you can see, this pattern is going to repeat and go on and on. Now, the other thing that's interesting for me, and this is what I was trying to express when I was answering Alden's inquiry, is the more subtle, intangible gradient between these disparate expressions of a field. I would proffer that there is an intangible quality, there's an intangible relationship between the subsets of expression in a field. Whereas we could think of like light in the physical world as whether it's mercury vapor or an LED or an incandescent bulb lighting the outer physical world, we can think of the light of the mind, which is, for me, classically illuminated through imagination and dreams, the inner light that lets us see into our inner darkness. So this is an example of the intangible relationship between complementary fields, which leads us to the notion of self-similarity across scale. This is the main qualitative attribute of a self-similar structure, of a chaos structure. Anything that's nonlinear, non-linearly dynamic, is self-similar across scale. We're going to take a look at that in a moment too. Likewise, there is a intangible connection in these fields between EMF and libido, between magnetism and emotions. In the physical world, we're familiar with how magnetism draws things together. Disparate objects are attracted to one another. In the corporal realm, we certainly know how emotions, the emotional field, attracts human beings to one another, or repels. Magnetism goes both ways. Most things do. Now, to move on to the notion of self-similarity across scale, sometimes this isn't the clearest way, and if I was a good video editor, I'd know how to insert this, but instead I'm going to go old school and present a couple of images here. So, this lovely naturally occurring spiral, as is this one, the exterior and the interior of a seashell. Self-similar. Now here the scale is pretty similar because it's parts of the same shell. But if we look at this image, which looks curiously similar to this one, where the seashell is measured in inches, the spiral galaxy is measured in parsecs. This is the most classic example of self-similarity across scale. It is visually immediately a recognizable, identifiable pattern. This is what is underneath nature, the way nature does nature, and I would go back and say that's why when Dan presented the chaos theory of systems in class, everybody got excited, because human beings are inextricably interwoven into this system, and we can't help but have it catch our imagination. Now, I want to go from, now that we've got a little bit of self-similarity and, nested fields, I want to take it back to, in the direction of psychology a little bit, since we're ostensibly learning something about psychology, and go to the subset of psyche, which is known as wisdom, which is one of my favorite things. And to illustrate how wisdom itself is self-similar across scale, I want to express that in the form of one of my favorite Native American parables, because I never met a gnosis I didn't like. Now, in this Native American parable that describes how wisdom is self-similar across scale, imagine yourself, it's the late 1800s on the North American continent, and a cavalry sergeant has been commissioned to go out into the plains and meet with a Native American chief and his tribe and explain to them why they are going to be relocated from their ancestral home. So the sergeant shows up, meets the chief, they go into the chief's tent and they sit on the ground and they face one another. And the sergeant begins his lengthy, wordy explanation about a president and some treaties and some surveys and mineral rights and coming forms of commerce and transportation and la la da da da, and he's going on and on and on. The patient chief is stoically sitting and quietly listening. After some time, the sergeant realizes he doesn't think he's getting through, and he wonders to himself, perhaps this man just simply doesn't understand my words and language. Maybe I should communicate to him in the way I might communicate to a child and draw him a picture. So the sergeant picks up a stick, and in the dirt, in the earth between them, he draws a circle. He says, look, chief, let me put it to you this way. This is how much your people know. And takes the stick. He says, and this, chief, is how much my people know. That's why you've got to trust me, listen to me, and leave your native ancestral homeland. The chief, still sitting quiet, patient, having not said a word yet, looks at the graph, looks at the man, calmly takes the stick from his hand, and in his own language, in words and pictures, simply says, for the first time, and this is what neither of us know. This is wisdom self-similar across scale. This also leads us to another interesting point about wisdom. If an insight like this does to you what it does to me at times and brings a tear to my eye, it is a wonderful reminder that in the alchemical tradition, tears are made of salt, and salt is the symbolic gradient of wisdom and bitterness. And the takeaway from that is that where there is bitterness, there is no room for wisdom. But where there's wisdom, there's no room for bitterness. So that's why Perry is always talking about the greatest love affair of all is the one that we have with the unknown. So, I'll leave you with that and invite you to go outside and play in the field. But remember, when you play in one field, you're playing in all of the fields, and the act of playing the game changes the rules. Thanks.